Well, good morning, everybody. And I would also encourage you to ask questions because there's some really good content on this. I didn't go out last night, just so you know. I didn't go out to the no-name bar because I'm like, I'm going to be interviewing this guy this morning, and he's like super freaking smart. So I want to be like on my A game here to try to try to do as best as I can.
Setting that bar way too high, Steve.
There you go. All right. So Keith, I want to kind of start off with just a little history of you and a history of Merz, if you would, please.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So good morning, everyone. Certainly appreciate you all having me here. This is my fourth meeting, actually, and it's been a really interesting journey for me. Search is incredibly important, and we'll get to that within the pharma space. Clearly, some of you know the different regulations that take place within the pharma space. Many people see that as barriers. I've been in the industry 21 years. I see it as a wonderful challenge. So as you reflect on my journey of my career, I started by carrying the bag. I was a sales rep in the Southeast. From there, I actually went into sales training, went into marketing, and then loved marketing so much, which a lot of folks ask me why. My wife's a neurologist. She often asks me, why are you in marketing? You have a biology and chemistry degree. But again, the industry is wonderful. The challenges are incredible. And then once I went into marketing, in fact, with Merz, this is my 7th therapeutic area, there are so many wonderful things that you can do. It's very similar in the satisfaction you all get on the consumer side or the analytics when you get to put a smile on someone's face. For me, it's about working with healthcare providers. It's about working with patients so that they have the best quality of life that they can, depending on what they're suffering from. And so recently, I joined Merz. I previously was with a small startup company for a couple of years. Prior to that, was with larger pharma and surgical sales. If I look at Merz, Merz is a wonderful little organization. It's a global company. We're in 67 different countries. We have over 22 different products and product lines. But uniquely enough, they want to specialize in two things. One is aesthetics, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The other is neurosciences. And as Steve shared and Ross said, what exactly is neurosciences? So neuroscience we specialize in, and you probably have heard of these disease states: Parkinson's disease, ALS, major brain trauma, and unfortunately, one of the epidemics that we don't hear about most often, everything we see in TV is about diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, very significant, but the one we don't see enough of is stroke. And there's just in the US, there's over 800,000 people that have a stroke every year. What that leads to for us with Merz, we don't necessarily treat those because there's no treatment for Parkinson's. There's options to increase quality of life. What we treat with our products are secondary, what we refer to as secondary symptoms. So it's going to be spasticity, and spasticity is really defined by the clenching of muscles. So you might see someone walk around with their hand clenched like this in their arm, and they can't move their arm. You'll see foot drop. Another one is dystonia, and that's involuntary movements of muscles. So for example, if I had cervical dystonia, which is dystonia of the neck, you would literally see me on stage with Steve here, and next thing you would see is my neck go like this. And then it would stop over here. And then it's stuck. So how do you release that muscle? A couple of other items, blepharospasm. So around your eye, you have what's called blephara, which are the muscles. Those, unfortunately, involuntarily close. So someone suffering from blepharospasm literally will, again, sit here on stage. I could be looking at Steve, and next thing I know, Steve is like, are you asleep? Are you asleep? No, my eyes shut. And then lastly is this wonderful term of sialorrhea, which is chronic severe drooling. And as we get into the importance of search, in the medical field, we create these wonderful terms that sound so scientific, but at the end of the day, the layman out there, when we market, we have to market at a 5th grade level. If I walk out to someone and I say sialorrhea, they're going to look at me and say, what in the world did you just say?
Do you even buy that keyword? I mean, is it known enough to even...
It's a great question. And what we don't, so we do, but we don't put a lot of spend behind it. We put more spend behind drooling, because what they do know is drooling, or they know cerebral palsy is another disease state we deal with. We'll look for, if it's a stroke, we actually will keywords, and I know we had the conversation yesterday about our keywords dying. I think there's probably a different story in the medical side for keywords. The reason why I say that, when you look in the consumer side, and we have a consumer division, they look for a solution automatically. So if I'm searching, and the gentleman over there yesterday brought up the whole car example. If I'm searching for a car, I'm going to put in, X date, let's call it a 2018 Ford F-150. It's going to bring back exactly what I need. The challenge that if you look at who is searching, and I'll get to that in a minute, and what they're actually searching in the medical world on Dr. Google, as we refer to it. They're looking at, is it drool? Is it the stroke? They're looking at primary, and then when you look at what's popping up, it's keywords, it's giving you definitions, but yes, it's a definition. It's not giving you the solution, and the solution is the treatment. And that's where we come into play. So keywords are still vitally important for what we do within the medical world.
It's such a strong signal. I could totally see that. I would see audience there being, that's an interesting part, right? So you have the aesthetics,
yep,
and you have the neurotoxins.
We do.
And I asked you this morning because I went through the site and I realized, are these basically the same thing? Mm-hmm. And they kind of are.
Yeah.
But you have to market them differently, obviously, but you also have different regulations based on whether they're aesthetic or whether they're
neuroscience.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Steve. It's a fascinating world when you get into the industry and you look at what we call device or cosmetic. It's regulated by a vertical within the FDA called AVMED. When you get into the pharma side, it's actually regulated by pharma, capital PHARMA. And it's two completely different regulatory bodies within the FDA and how they actually regulate device and aesthetics versus biologics and pharma. Being on the pharma side for a while, and I was on the surgical side, which falls into the AVMED, pharma's really, really, really strict. How many of you guys have seen a commercial on TV about a pharma product, no matter what you're watching? How many of you scratch your head when you're watching that commercial, say, okay, I learned that it's a pharma product, but now all I know is what we refer to as fair balance, which is the safety, that product could cause stroke, your eyes popping out of your head, severe diarrhea, severe vomiting, suicidal ideation.
Suicidal thoughts. I'm like,
yep.
Whoa. Suicidal thoughts?
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy. So the regulation, when you have a 60-second spot in TV, 60%, so 40 seconds have to be designated to fair balance or safety information. That's why you'll see some of the larger disease states, again, diabetes, oncology, not stroke, but cardiovascular disease, they spend the money they can because there's so many patients that can resort to them. One of my competitors actually is on TV. You guys probably have heard of this small drug called Botox. So we compete against Botox on both the aesthetic side as well as the therapeutic side. And when you look at the aesthetic side with Botox and the therapeutic and they cross, what they market in TV is all about migraine. And now people are saying, okay, you're talking about migraine and now you're going to inject a botulinum toxin into someone's head. But guess what, guys? It's so diluted, it's not going to cause anything other than relief of the muscle. So if you think about botulinum toxin, it paralyzes the muscle. So it allows the muscle to relax. So you're going to start to see, in the world I live in right now, there's 4 of us. So Botox is the main one, we're second, and then there's 2 other. You're going to see 3 more in the next 2 years. And then you're also going to see a plethora of different indications come across. And that's when, again, we have to look at understanding patients' journeys based on indication, specific keywords that will lead them to different digital platforms that we have that ultimately, and uniquely different than the consumer space, because if you have a consumer website, you can see me do some keyword search that drives me to your website, and then I could potentially buy something. So if I'm on Zappos, I could buy a pair of shoes, and you can retarget me.
Yep, direct.
The challenge we have in the healthcare space is I can get you to my website. Once you drop off my website through digital tracking, how do I figure out that you followed up with an HCP, in my case, a neurologist or physiatrist, and you received medication in the class, so a botulinum toxin, more specifically, my product?
So how do you figure it out? Because it is a tangled web from what you described to me so far.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey behind the scenes for the analytics to do that. So what we do is we work with companies, for example, one is Crossix. They take consumer behavior with our digital tracking, whether it's through paid search, and they'll monitor that through the activity, and then we outline to say, okay, in this therapeutic area, we know at least it takes 6 to 9 months to drive a patient from first interaction to an HCP to receive the injection or what we consider some type of prescription because it is a prescription product. We gain that through IMS, and then we have to link that. But you guys have probably heard these wonderful other regulations called HIPAA. I can't see patient information, so it's all got to be deduped. So we have to go through third-party information. They actually have the ability to take that information through paid search, through our keyword search, wherever they're going, track them digitally, tie them to an HCP visit, tie them to in-class, and then my product. And I'll share with you just an example. In my previous life, I was dealing with life-threatening allergies, and I love these David versus Goliath stories because I don't know whether you guys have heard of a product called EpiPen. So I was
almost everyone, right? Come on.
I was competing against them in my previous life, and actually I had the honor and pleasure working with Mark USA to do a lot of our paid search. What we were able to do working with Crossix and specific keywords, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of keywords in life-threatening allergies that we actually had to purchase, but we had a 4-to-1 ROI on our paid search, tying it to a prescription of our product.
So did you compete with the guy that took over EpiPen and charged all, raised all the prices and all that?
Yeah.
That part of your...
Yeah, so it was an interesting, so we call it Epiplosion, that took place in August of 2016 with Heather Bresch, and her 600% increase in pricing. So we rode the wave of that. Wow. And as you can imagine, in riding the wave, we also purchased competitive terms, which were a lot of myelin, so we could gain that traction through the search.
Do you do that now with Botox or with any of your competitors? Are you buying directly, and do they do the same to you?
They do. It's a battle every 12:01 a.m. when you're bidding for the words. We have to be very, very specific. We're a smaller organization, and I know you had asked me about Merz. When you look at Merz, we're based out of Frankfurt. We're a German, privately held company, fifth-generation family.
110 years old. Yeah.
110. They started, the gentleman actually who started the company had a vision to say, I just want to go aesthetics and stay aesthetics. And as his family evolved the organization, got into neurosciences because one of the family members actually was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Wow. So this gentleman created our botulinum toxin, which is a pure molecule to compete against Botox, and it's been an incredible, incredible journey.
Wait, so it's not the same then?
No,
botulinum isn't the main. I thought they were just different prescriptions or different names on top of that.
Yeah, no. So you actually have to have a unique proprietary molecule to be able to file it with the FDA and get the brand. That's why you'll see for them, their incobotulinum toxin. We're abobotulinum toxin. So just the first 3 letters of each botulinum toxin is actually a different brand.
Wow. So I think all the regulations and everything are so very interesting, and I have some of the best notes ever here. On this page, I have the words Christy Brinkley, which is your sponsor. Yep. And if you go to Merz and look at their site, there's a picture of Christy Brinkley on the aesthetics portion, and she's like 63. Mm-hmm. Is that what, she looks basically like she did in, what was it, National Lampoon's Vacation. Yep. Pretty much the same. So I know that's pretty much a testament.
Yeah, no, Christy Brinkley has been a phenomenal attribute. So we've had her as our spokesperson for about 18 months now. And part of the reason why, if you can imagine, even if you go to search, if you search Christy Brinkley, we're going to pop up organically, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
She's got so much name recognition tied to her, and it was just interesting how the paths crossed between Merz and one of the owners of Merz from the family and Christy Brinkley. So she's our spokesperson on the aesthetic side, as you can imagine, and we're actually evolving the aesthetics business just a little bit. As we talk about, and Ross had mentioned patient journey, initially it was all about fillers and botulinum toxin in older individuals, primarily females. Now when you look at the different generations, we're actually seeing millennials actually, let's call it being selfless, but they're also more in tune to themselves. They're actually getting fillers and injections at the average age of 32.
Wow. What was it before? I mean, what was the normal average age until?
54. So that's why Christy Brinkley, of that generation, if you're 54, I remember, I'm not much younger than that, I can remember Christy Brinkley, National Lampoons. The younger generation, millennials, if you want to tie them to something, they don't, anybody here a Kim Kardashian?
Oh, that's the next one.
They know Kim Kardashian. They have no idea who Christy Brinkley is. So you've got to modify.
That's what's wrong with this world, by the way, that they don't know that.
Yeah. And it's really interesting if you flip it to the neuroscience as we talk about patient journeys and who's actually doing the search. We have identified through working with Google and Yahoo and Bing, the folks in my market for neurosciences who are doing search, and this probably won't surprise you, but it's typically females who are between 25 and 28 to about 40, and then females who are 55 plus.
So that's an interesting part, because that was a whole targeting thing that you were telling me that you can and can't do. On aesthetics, you can target, I assume, not that you would, or maybe you are, Beverly Hills, or some place where you think you might get a stronger percentage of people that would use your product. But you can't do it with your neurotoxins, right? There's rules.
There's regulations that say when you're in the pharma space that I have to offer the same to every single individual across the board. Where on the aesthetics, Avamed, surgical, wherever you are, you can hyper-target, geo-target a little bit better than what you can on the pharma side. So what we're doing within the same organization, because we own both neuro as well as aesthetic, is we're piggybacking on aesthetics to be able to target these two markets.
Which is smart.
Yeah, because
you're
if you
using
think
the
about
data from audience, or at that level,
the audience data to target that specific audience. Because if you think about who we are as individuals in this room, your parents, if they're still alive, you probably are interacting with your parents and or taking care of them. And let's be honest, gentlemen, it's more of our wives or females we know taking care of their parents than it is us. And then it's the spouse, again, that 55 female that, again, is either a spouse of someone who has ALS, just recently had a stroke, or diagnosed with Parkinson's. And then it's typically on the CP side, cerebral palsy side, the mothers who are so engaged, and they're getting their information through search, and then secondarily, they're getting their information through Facebook online communities. So we, as an organization, now have to create what we refer to as DOIs, or digital online influencers.
So, I mean, is that for all extents and purposes an audience?
Mm-hmm.
You consider it to
absolutely.
be that? So you're kind of using that signal of search to build out an audience, albeit for a slightly different purpose. But
completely.
Yes. And it's the same group of people. It's the that makes sense. That's actually really interesting. The Kim Kardashian thing, you've got to tell that on the whole influencer thing. So I just love having both Christy Brinkley and
so Christy Brinkley, when you look at her as our spokesperson, so Kim Kardashian, if you guys remember a couple years ago, it was on the verge of 2015, 2016. She was actually the spokesperson as well as a digital online influencer for a birth control product. When she posted, or the company posted her picture on social media, as well as the small caption, it was just the name of the product, so there's something wrong with that, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then the next thing they were doing is they were actually promoting the product off-label for clear skin. And so here you had a picture of Kim Kardashian, everybody knows who she is, beautiful woman, clear skin, 100% clear, brand product, off-label. The FDA came back and said, again, it's a pharmaceutical product. One of the regulations we have is if you mention the name of your brand, you now have to wrap it again with what we call fair balance. So we have to have safety information. There is no safety information. Secondly, you cannot advertise a pharmaceutical product off-label. That is false advertising, and the FDA will come down hard on you. So not only did they have the organization remove that from the social posting, but that organization also received $1 million fine.
Ooh. Well, it's Kim Kardashian.
That's pocket change.
Yeah, it's easy. Tell me a little bit about this. So one thing I like about having a whole bunch of rules, which I know isn't always nice, but is that it's very specific, and you can find some, well, that's not a rule.
Right.
So without telling anything proprietary, I would just ask you, what do you do? I mean, what have you found that's a way of sort of getting into something, not obviously breaking any kind of rule or anything, but do you find it's a landing page thing, or have you tried YouTube, or is YouTube an option? Are the same rules apply to everything that you're doing? It doesn't really.
Yeah, it really does. So what we do is we have to, not only are we working with the FDA, the FTC, the OIG, OPDP, but we also internally work with our own what we call a review committee, and that it houses my marketing team that I lead, and then we have a lawyer who sits on it, a medical doctor, regulatory, and compliance. And so we take whatever we want to design to marry up to our marketing strategy into this review committee team meeting on a weekly basis. The result of that is some marketing asset. We then file that with the FDA, and that's in search. that's in landing pages, it's in YouTube. No matter what, all the rules still apply. Now, having said that, again, it's a wonderful industry because there's a lot of false information out there or just not known information. And what we're finding, even from the HCP standpoint, is that when patients are more educated, they have a better relationship with their HCP because now they're making decisions together in what we refer to as a care team versus that physician telling the patient what to do. So whatever we can do as an organization to increase education and awareness, not just awareness of the brand, but education around the disease states that are part of our portfolio, we have products to treat, it's vitally important that we advertise across the different social or media platforms.
Do you do that now? Do you do any kind of videos explaining that? And how does that work? Is it a good, I've always talked about us doing it at an automotive level, and not just the typical commercial, but doing it like, here's how many bags you can put in the back.
Right.
You know, like something useful that you'd want to know.
Yeah.
Do you guys do that on any of your products?
Yeah, so we're actually evolving as I join the organization. One of the assets and strategies I'm going to deploy is what we call patient ambassadors. And if you can think about when someone's diagnosed with Parkinson's, and if you can just put yourself in those shoes, or someone you know who has diabetes or cancer or cardiovascular disease, it's that aha moment of, oh crap, what just happened? So they're sitting in the doctor's office, and as soon as they receive that diagnosis, everything else that doctor is saying, they don't hear. Yeah. So how can we then align ourselves to educate these people, because we know they're overwhelmed and we know they're immediately going to go home and they're going to start searching. So how can we create different assets? And I like where you're going with videos. So one of the items I've done in my past is create what we call patient ambassadors. And these are individuals who suffer from the different diseases that we treat. And we videotape them, we'll throw them on our website. We actually, in my previous life, created a YouTube channel, which I'll do with my newer brands with this organization.
So that's super authentic. You've got actual real patients talking about it, which is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. And then it's amazing because then you can activate folks that you don't even pay. Let's say, for example, bloggers that will get your information out. So now you have a network of folks that are working on your behalf to educate the audience or target market that you're trying to reach.
That's amazing. Well, I can see we're getting close to time. I do want to bring this up, though, with your ad copy. I thought this is really interesting. And you kind of said it just now, and it I don't know, had a little more impact. I mean, you get that diagnosis, and then you're right, that's all you could hear, I imagine. Like everything that happened before that. So what do? You go home and what do you search for? Do you search problematic? Do you search like a solution based? Like, hey, I need help with, you know, obviously, what do they search for? What are the biggest ones that are coming in? Yeah,
no, it's a fair question. And if I can just really quickly share with you all the patient journey. So let's take, for example, someone who has a stroke and then a secondary symptom of spasticity, so the clenching of a hand or arm or a leg. They go to their primary care doctor or internal medicine doctor.
And they're not going to type in spasticity.
No, because they don't know
spell it, right?
So all they know is stroke, and then they're going to try and figure this out, so they don't know exactly what this is. They'll say something, my arm is stiff. Stiffness is a great keyword for us. But anyway, when they're diagnosed with stroke, great. They know they had the stroke. They're in the hospital. They get discharged. Something happens maybe a year or two later. They then go to their primary care doctor or their internal medicine doctor, and they're told, and this is where the sad part is, they're told to deal with it. So on average, when you look at patient journeys within the landscape of just stroke, it takes 4 to 7 years for that patient to actually reach a neurologist or a physiatrist to treat that ailment appropriately.
So it's misdiagnosed, really, right? I mean,
completely misdiagnosed, or there's no awareness at the primary care internal medicine level. So unfortunately, they go home, and now they're said, okay, I have to deal with it. So now they're going through these phases of depression and anger. So now they're Googling depression, they're Googling, anger. How do I deal with this? Is it a hot bath? It's amazing where patients' heads go when they aren't diagnosed.
Holistic and all the...
Exactly. Yeah. So then, to your point, when you finally get them to where they need to go, and that's where we have to understand that patient journey and inject ourselves. As you and I were talking about attribution, I've got to have attribution the entire way to understand where they are. So no pun intended, but I need to be able to inject myself to build the awareness, to drive them to the right doctor so they get my brand. When you look at the ad copy, though, again, if you guys have your computers, if you were to Google migraine, migraine's a key word within the botulinum toxin space, and an unbranded ad comes up, which if you click on it, it'll drive you to Botox. So our ad copy is critically important with specific, especially around our indications. Now, no one's gonna know blepharospasm, so we look for something like closing of the eye or involuntary movement of the eye. They'll align a little bit more than that, but even the word involuntary is tough for consumers, for the average consumer to understand.
And you're writing it at a level that's probably like a 6th or 7th grade level,
Exactly.
right? You're keeping it very
Very.
ad copy as well, I assume. And
Oh, absolutely.
you mentioned something that's crazy to me. You got to love ETA, I guess, but a portion of your ad copy has to have the fair balance. Or what was
Yeah,
the
fair
role?
balance. So
Yeah.
safety information. So yeah, you all know with ad copy, you're limited on characters. So if we mention brand and we go out with brand ad copy, I've got to now balance that with safety information, and they have to have one click. It can't be any more than one click away from safety information.
Yeah, same thing with like leasing information and so forth.
Exactly.
Excellent. Ross, how are we doing?
Great. I mean, I'm learning a lot. Do you guys have any questions for these guys? None? We're such a quiet group. I have like 5, but we're already over time. I guess what I'm really wondering, I mean, you mentioned like you need 40 seconds of your 60-second spot to be full of like the disclosures. Mm-hmm. What's the consumer recall on that? Do you do studies on that?
You know, it's interesting you asked that. We did a pilot study in what we call 10 different MSAs in my previous brand. And when we looked at it, while the spend is incredible, so just to share with you guys, as you all know, creating commercials is ridiculous. The timeline for us to create a commercial is about 1.5 years because it's all got to go through the FDA twice. And we actually have to receive final approval and thumbs up from the FDA. However, once we receive the approval, the impact in building awareness is monumental. Mm-hmm. It's just the challenge is, do you really want to designate 80% of your budget to commercials? And what we do know is when we look at our audience, the majority of our audience is no longer watching traditional TV. So is there a better way that we can leverage digital platforms to get out there, i.e. like Netflix and doing digital commercials or anything online that we can do to minimize the cost? And actually when you're doing it online, while yes, you have to balance it with safety information, it's much easier to do in a digital platform than it is on a commercial.
Absolutely.
And much more trackable.
I'm also wondering, like, just for the future, I mean, this is a big question, you probably can't answer it. Like, is the red tape relaxing at some level? I mean, it's such a huge, it's like its own industry in your industry. I mean, like, is there a future for that, like, of maybe less of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, you bring up a good point. If you actually go to the FDA website and look under OPDP, you'll find that in 2016, late 2016 Q4, they finally recognized, because the industry and all of our are saying, hey, when you look at certain medications, we get that you've got to have some stringent rules and regulations around it. But when you get to some other medications, for example, botulinum toxin, it is such a, I don't want to say naive product, but it's not going to cause harm. It causes the paralysis of the muscle. It does what it does. Within 6 months, you got to get another injection. You look at other medications, epinephrine's one, a lot of your anti-infectives for different disease states when you have cough, cold, pneumonia. Those are benign products that aren't going to cause any issues. So can we relax? So they told us, coming back to the industry, that within 18 to 24 months, they look to revise some of their guidance for how we can market. Oh. Now, having said that, that was 2016, it's 2018, we haven't heard from them yet.
So that was, so they're already like basically missed the deadline.
Yes.
Did they forget about it?
No, we remind them frequently, but again, it is the government.
Right.
So we have to
I'm sure
be
they go
patient.
the other way too, right? I'm sure they
That
hand
we all have
down
so much faith in
regulations.
these days.
And that's what
And
we
you
wait
gotta-
for. And that's it. So one of the biggest areas of interest right now among the FDA is actually paid media and social media. They don't know exactly how to monitor. They have guidance, but we don't have the regulation yet and how we actually have to market. So it's really up to each organization and then how each organization wants to work with the FDA.
Yeah, man. Well, I learned a lot about how much the government knows by watching the Facebooks and Googles getting interviewed by Congress. That was pretty interesting. Anyway, well, guys, we have to cut because we are over time. But
Well,
this
thank
was
you guys.
awesome.
I appreciate